Hello and welcome to yet another home quarantine edition of BC Poly Hot Stove. I am Maclean K, the editor-in-chief of the Orca, joining you live from my dining room table. And joining me from far-flung Langley.
Yes, far-flung. Jordan Bateman, Vice President Communications for the Independent Contractors and Businesses Association. And yes, despite the pandemic, there's still independent contracting and businessing going on, along with our association. So we may be physically distant, but we're together in our hearts.
As always. Now, it's different for us because, most of the time we're doing the show remotely. It's not like Jodi and George where they have to kind of like relearn how to, each other's cues when they're not in the same room. So I feel like we have a head start, which, to be honest, we need.
Yeah, well, absolutely. It's our only challenge. It's our only benefit we have of this is that we're used to being way away. It is kind of funny, right? Like Jodi and George do have this really good dynamic, but you put them on the Zoom call together and they were kind of like talking over each other, and it was sort of entertaining. However, I gotta say, Maclean, before we get going, I am like on the edge of my seat for this week's Unspun because George has been beating up Kennedy Stewart and taking a beating from people online. Jodi's baby boomer, anti-baby boomer COVID piece. Just kidding, it's not anti-baby boomer, but if you don't actually read it, you may get that impression. She's been taking a beating online, so I'm hoping they're surly. I'm hoping that they're punchy, and I'm hoping they really drop the gloves and go at it. Not with each other, but with humanity at large.
Humanity at large, but I think specifically, and really the one we're just absolutely salivating to watch is George going at the city of Vancouver.
Yes.
Not celebrating their misfortune because Mayor Kennedy Stewart said that the city is at serious risk of going bankrupt, which is serious. But man, there are other cities out there that are handling this far better. We're going to talk about a few of them. And it's not an accident that Vancouver finds itself, caught with its pants down in the cookie jar. I'm going to mix all the metaphors at once.
That's right.
Yeah,
that's right. The checks are coming home to roost. The chicks are coming home to roost. It's all coming home to roost.
Of all the cities in Canada to not save for a rainy day.
Of course it's Vancouver. Look, and listen, like, the funny thing to me is, like, they still won't touch that capital program. And listen, we're in construction. We want to build stuff. But, if ever there was a time to take the 1 year off of the construct, like, this is a 1 year thing. So, take a little bit of money from that and put it across. You could get through. But I want to talk about a mayor who does not get nearly enough love. And, online, everyone loves Brad West. No, he's the greatest. Nope, he's not. The greatest mayor in British Columbia today is Stew Young in Langford, and it's not even close. This guy has been mayor there. He's basically the George Washington of Langford, the founding father, except he doesn't believe in term limits. God bless him, and thank God he doesn't, because he is doing a wonderful job running Langford. While all of these other municipalities and TransLink are crying poor and begging for handouts from the provincial government, Stew Young and Langford are actually spending money, as much as $400,000 to try to, keep their people in Langford ahead of the curve on COVID-19. They've been doing community testing before anyone else is doing it. They're buying remote thermometers so they can start testing people when they go back to public places. And it's partly funded by a $60,000 donation by Mayor Stew Young. So whereas other mayors, executives, CAOs, senior staffs cry poor and demand some sort of money from government, from a higher level of government to bail them out, but don't even cut their paychecks, won't even touch their compensation packages, Stew Young's stroking a check for $60,000 to protect his people. I say kudos to Stew Young. We need more of you out there in BC.
Well, I will join that cheers. It is kind of remarkable what they've been managing to do in Langford. Langford is not big. No. Langford is a suburb of Victoria, if you're not familiar with it. It's its own city. It's its own municipality.
I consider it the Langley of Vancouver Island.
Is actually not a bad comparison. But, I don't even know how long Stew Young has been the mayor there. He's an institution. And you're starting to see why. I mean, they were out way ahead on this, setting up their own independent testing lab, which, we're not talking about for some reason, because it didn't follow official advice at the time. But the point is that they were trying to do things. And as you pointed out, he has been putting his own money where his mouth is.
Yeah, and on my Twitter at Jordan Bateman, you can see a link to the Goldstream Gazette story on this. take a look. Tell me that you wouldn't feel better living in that community than the community you're living in right now. They seem to be taking this seriously. They have a higher rate of community testing than anywhere else because they actually invested the money into doing it. So it's just remarkable to me that, we'll spend hours and hours of TV time, many column inches, many pixels online, whinging about Kennedy Stewart and Surrey and all these other communities and how desperate they are. And we won't spend, we'll get a Goldstream Gazette article on that. No offense to Goldstream Gazette, but we'll get one piece on Stew Young and this incredible donation and the leadership he's shown in Langford. So yeah, it's interesting now to start to see how you're starting to see divisions in how communities, how various leaders in comparable states or provinces have handled things. You're starting to see divergence, and you're starting to see, I think you're seeing who's really rising to the top and maybe who's flailing around a bit.
Yeah, and I mean, you're exactly right. And it's too soon, and I don't think people are ready to start looking at this kind of thing yet. But with the lens of history, 10, 20 years after all this has hopefully faded away, it will be fascinating to go back and look at all the different municipalities, provinces, countries, how they handled this crisis, hitting them not exactly at the same time, but pretty close in historical terms. And yeah, there will be some that distinguish themselves and some that didn't.
Yeah, it's funny to see there's great affection for Dr. Henry here in BC, but there's almost equal amounts of loathing of Dr. Tam in Ottawa. And some people make the case that, well, what they've done has been very similar. I actually disagree. I think Dr. Henry took us down a path a lot quicker than Dr. Tam did in Ottawa. My great fear has been Trudeau is going to suddenly wake up one day and realize that he needs Bonnie Henry in Ottawa and steal her away from us somehow. Fortunately, travel is near impossible unless you're Andrew Scheer and his 4 children. So, it'll be fine. But, it is interesting, that divergence. And some people say, well, you're a provincial health officer, you have a little bit more power than the federal one and all these different things. I just think Bonnie Henry took it more seriously early on. I think the fact that we are so connected to China as far as travel goes forced us to act quicker.
Yep.
And it always amazes me how, BC seems to come out with a measure and then the rest of the country eventually follows suit. Now, the rest of the country usually goes even further, and then we kind of end up lapping, but that's sort of the pendulum of the way things go. But in my world, if we're doing math homework with the kids, Dr. Henry is far greater than Dr. Tam.
Yeah, and
that's my power rankings, my controversial power rankings of health officers.
The thing that I have appreciated, in addition to everything else you've said about the way Dr. Henry has handled this, is the fact that she has tried, not even tried, I think she succeeded in being reasonable. Yes. In that saying things like, yes, of course you should go outside for walks and runs. Even tricky sort of, you might argue, slippery slope questions. I think yesterday, I don't know if Keith Baldry asked the question, but he was talking about it on Twitter about golf. And Dr. Henry saying, of course, all things being equal, it's better to stay home. That said, if you can go out golfing with your own family, why not? You compare that with what's happening in Ottawa, the city of Ottawa right now, where they're literally saying, don't talk to your neighbors over the fence.
It's unbelievable.
Sitting outside. It's literally stop smiling at your neighbors. It's insane.
It is.
And I think that there's a real danger in that kind of overreach, in that people will you are inevitably going to ignore a directive to stop talking to your neighbor. It's going to happen. And then once you do that, either consciously or subconsciously, you're going to start picking and choosing which directives to follow, because obviously not all of them are doable. No, and from there, it's a very slippery slope to ignoring ones that you really ought to follow. And I really appreciate the way Dr. Henry and the officials here have handled that by saying things like, yeah, by all means, if you can get outside, get outside. Stay home, but exercise, fresh air. Yeah, that is going to give people sort of the fortitude and the confidence that they can stick this out. They don't have to be prisons in their apartments or houses or anything like that. They don't have to stop smiling at their friends.
Yeah, no, exactly. Like we shouldn't be shunning each other. Ottawa, though, of course, famous for busting kids' lemonade stands and kids' ball hockey, ticketing them. So a bunch of fascists there in Ottawa police. I don't know what's going on. But, like in our neighborhood in the past week, there's a few driveways down. It's clear that they're settled in for the long haul. They've pulled out their little portable fire put in the middle of the driveway. They have kind of 6 chairs, sort of like 3 clusters of 2. They're about 8 feet apart each cluster. And, they have friends in the neighborhood, and they're clearly having, they're having a beer after work or after whatever. Like, hey, we made another day. And in this weather, who can blame them? They're socially distant. They're not inside. They're doing everything correctly. And yeah, more power to them. We're at a point now in BC where, far more people have recovered from the virus than have an active diagnosis of the virus.
That's right.
I think if you take out jail, if you take out long-term care homes, if you take out people in the hospital, we're talking about maybe 100 cases in the community somewhere, diagnosed positives. Now I know that other people may have it, and that's one of the things that we should talk about later is how do we get to more widespread testing. But it would actually be kind of difficult to go out now and try to catch it, right? Like if you were going to go out on purpose, like where you can't get into long-term care homes, you can't get into hospitals. Like we're trying to do a good job of sequestering this. Not to say we should relax things or anything like that, because it can flare back quickly. But it is, the numbers are with you. And for all the talk of disinfecting groceries and scrubbing your Amazon packages and stuff, we've yet to see anyone actually like come forward with having caught it that way. Restaurants, takeout, seems to be fine. And like you said, that a lot of that comes back to Dr. Henry being, kind of somewhat reasonable, even if some municipalities go too far, like Langley closing giant parks and tennis courts for some reason, and stuff like that is dumb. But by and large, I think she's, you get the sense that, she's willing to, not overlook, but she's willing to be reasonable on certain things in order to keep, the bulk of everything else in place.
Yeah, it has been disappointing just on a purely selfish personal level to see some of the parks closed. As we've talked about this before. I'm a condo dweller, and so our chance of getting outdoors is entirely dependent on being able to get to a relatively close by open green space, and there are fewer and fewer of them. Over the weekend, Government House, where the Lieutenant Governor lives, which if you've never been,
Macduff,
that's right, the Vice Regal Macduff. Is just, the grounds are gorgeous, and it's a very short walk from here. And they closed it for the long weekend. And I mean, my wife and I, they're not reopening. We knew that. And then yesterday we saw the tweet saying that they had decided to stay closed to the public, which it's a shame, because I think that yes, there is some added risk in my family and I driving to Government House, walking around the grounds, not seeing anyone. There is more risk inherent in that than staying home. But we are much more likely to stay home longer if we can have brief outings like that. So
is it more so for you staying home? Like you press the elevator button, you touch the door handles outside. Like you live with, I don't know how many units are in your condo building, but dozens, 24. I'm assuming. 24. Yeah. So, like that, is it more risk? I don't think it is, right? Like,
yeah, you have a good point too. I mean, that's the other thing I was saying, is that if you think that walking in the acres and acres of Government House is risky, then you should see our hallways. Yeah, you should see it. I mean, this is a clean building. Don't get me wrong, but I mean, I share it with people. So many seniors. So it's to my knowledge, no one in the building has gotten sick, and we've all and we still talk to each other. Nice. So in your face, Ottawa.
You do it by tapping on the wall to each other, and like A is 1 and B is 2 and C is.
We've just set up an email list so that things because we do have seniors, and things like if you can't get to the grocery store. There's 2 blocks from here. If you run out of, you need your bananas or whatever, because delivery is not an option anymore. Yeah. Please tell one of us to go get it for you. I mean, that's the kind of stuff that we all should be doing.
Yeah. So we needed a couple things for supper last night, and I went to our local Save-On at 5:15. And it was actually less stressful than going pre-pandemic with everyone getting home from work and stopping to save on the way home. Like, I was actually shocked. Like, they have the arrows pointing now each way up and down the aisle. Everyone was socially distant. I only went, every till is open. There's tons of staff in the store because they're constantly restocking. I was actually kind of surprised. There's no yeast, and the baking supplies are all kind of pillaged. I never checked on toilet paper or anything like that. We just needed milk and a couple other things, but it was it's kind of interesting to see that shift now, and people, like, it seems like the people who go first thing in the morning are the ones who end up waiting the longest. Like, maybe wait for the afternoon if you can.
That actually does seem to be the case, because that was what I was doing, was going right after senior hour. Because I was told that was the best time to go when the shelves were stocked, et cetera, and so forth. And there is a lineup outside. The one I usually go to, it's around the block, but because everyone's 6 feet apart, it's deceptive. It's not nearly as long as it looks. I had to go an afternoon last weekend, and I just walked right in, and it was fine. It was actually kind of nice. There was no one in there.
Yeah, it's kind of weird how that goes. Okay, Maclean, I want to talk about Chris Cuomo.
Yes.
Okay, so Chris Cuomo, brother of Andrew Cuomo. I got that right? I always end up calling Andrew Cuomo Mario Cuomo because of his dad. Yeah. And then my wife looks at me like I'm 1,000 years old. But anyways, Chris Cuomo has coronavirus. CNN anchor has been broadcasting from his basement. And he kind of went on he was clearly at a low point a couple days ago. Yeah. And everyone gets there. And the nice thing is not all of us have, national cable television shows where our low point is broadcast live to the world. But he kind of went on, or it was a radio show, his radio show, I think it was on Sirius XM. He went off and talked about how distraught he was about journalism, how he hates what he does, how, the bipartisanship and the constant nattering is really getting to him. And, he thought he got into it to make a difference, and he's not sure if he is. And it was a real stream of consciousness thing. Now, he walked a bunch of it back a day later because he probably realized that it sounded like it was harsh about his bosses. I don't think it was. I think it was more about an internal conflict he's feeling. But Maclean, I submit to you, we've talked on previous podcasts about how I believe coming out of this pandemic, you will see more people who normally go into business or media or things consider a life in public service and in politics, because we are being reminded of the importance of those decision makers. And when you get dummies like on Vancouver City Council who can't even mute a Zoom call when they're flushing a toilet during a council meeting, you think to yourself, there's got to be better people to run this town, and maybe it's me. Yeah. Or better people to run this state government, maybe it's me. For the first time in a long time, maybe in our generation, governance and who's leading us matters.
Yep.
It mattered in, the mid 90s when Paul Martin and Jean Chrétien made the tough decisions to put Canada on a better fiscal path. And thank God they did, or this thing would have just knocked us completely. We'd be a third world country. It matters when, Gordon Campbell gets the Olympics and rebuilds BC's finances and launches us into a modern, tourism golden age, things like that. It matters, but it wasn't life and death.
Yeah.
And this reminds us, not since really maybe the Vietnam War for the Americans, but, World War II for the Canadians. Like, we haven't had leaders have to make life and death decisions. Thank God. Thank God, given the caliber of leaders we have throughout our history. But I do believe that what Cuomo is kind of noodling in his own mind and heart is like, okay, when you go to journalism school and, you're taught like, why would you want to be, why would you want to go into politics? Why would you want to be the horse when you could be the jockey, right? Like, that's the thing. You steer them where you want to go. And, I've been in enough budget lockups to know that budget narratives don't really form until Vaughn and Keith get up and ask their questions, right? Like, you steer the boat. But ultimately, you're not the decision maker. And you're not the one who has to make those life and death decisions. And I do think that you're going to see this kind of, I wonder if you see this kind of renewed affection or desire to go into public service, go into political life, go into maybe, administration, high level administration from people who normally would say no.
Yeah, I agree. I think there's a couple reasons for that. First is the reasons you just laid out. The sad part is that I think you'll also see some people whose path was laid out for them down another career, and things have been disrupted, and so they might be now open to new possibilities. The other thing I know it's a terrible point to bring up, but I think we're going to see people like that. The other thing that I hope happens from this is that not just Canada, and I think North America as well, there's this curious indifference to municipal politics. You see it in voter turnout. It's astonishingly low. It's something like 15%. Which is almost hard to believe in some cities. And yet these are the decisions that everyone acknowledges sort of most affect your day-to-day lives. Where I live here in Victoria, where they're, trying to ban Christmas. And I would just assume they didn't.
How does Vancouver Island produce Ben Isitt and Stew Young?
It's in the same,
I know.
In a lot of other places, it'd be the same city. And it maybe should be, but it's breathtaking that there's this complete indifference to municipal level politics. Most people don't even vote for things like the school board. But I think this crisis may begin to change that, because we are going to see some pretty stark differences in the way, different municipalities have handled things. We keep bringing up Ottawa, but that's the one that I just keep, rolling my eyes over. But, Vancouver to a much lesser extent as well, just because they're not being draconian. And then you compare it with places like Langford. And yes, we mentioned it before and we dismissed him, but, Port Coquitlam's handling this fairly well as well so far. So I think, hopefully, people afterwards will start looking around and saying, I wish our city was run like that. And the only way I'm going to make that happen is by running.
Yeah, I agree. So it's interesting to see this kind of develop. So I do wonder if that will be one of the outflows for sure. Side note, I forgot to mention, we were talking about cities, but TransLink also saying they're losing $75 million a month. Their CEO is the highest paid transit authority CEO, not in Canada, but in North America. Maybe take a symbolic pay cut there, bud. Like, maybe slash your own pay there. I think you could probably still squeeze by on $250,000 a year, down from $450. I think you can do it. I believe in you. But even if it's just a sign to your employees and to your board members that, hey, in good faith, I'm putting our money where our mouth is. Let's start there. But my lack of affection for TransLink is well documented.
I was going to say well documented, but I mean, you're right. I mean, that would be a textbook case of somebody who could take one for the team. Totally.
Now, you wrote about Trudeau and the and Cottage Gate, Eastergate. I thought your piece was pretty fair. Like, it was kind of like, it's not as bad as like, me getting in a car and driving to Penticton and getting an Airbnb and, being a strain on everything, but it still wasn't great.
Yeah, it was, I think, important to sort of understand, where he physically drove to. We were just talking about, Langford and City Victoria. The distance from Ottawa to Harrington Lake is not a hell of a lot longer. It's an easy drive. It's something like 30 kilometers. Yeah. In fact, I think it's not even as far as Souk, because the highway is better.
Right.
And it's not a public community. It is literally a private, lakefront cabin, we would call it, where with no houses around it, that has been designated as the Prime Minister's, not just this Prime Minister, summer retreat since I don't even know how long, and it's been well used, and they have commuted, in fact, from work there. So we're not talking about it's not like going to Galliano, it's not like going to Penticton. So was he reckless? Was he endangering anyone? No. We're talking about a long weekend where supplies were either delivered for him or I gather his family was already there, which I didn't realize.
Right.
So they were supplied. No one was endangered. That said, he lives in a city where I hate to keep coming back to this, but people are being told not to talk to their neighbors.
Yeah.
Much less drive out to the cabin. We're told here, especially here on the long weekend after, ferry traffic was down 92%. And still there was this, like, I think I called it a firestorm of hand-wringing and shame and accusations. Oh, my. 92% reduction. Amazing. And Dr. Bonnie Henry, again, to her credit, has said, look, there are dozens of legitimate reasons for travel, and we should not be judging people we know nothing about, whose circumstances we know nothing about. That said, if there was ever a time for the Prime Minister to sort of symbolically say, yes, stay home really does mean all of us, not just, if you have an easy way out for the weekend, not just for, just to pop out. Because once we start doing that, there are a lot of Canadians, especially in places like Toronto and Vancouver, Victoria, that have, cabins, cottages, timeshares, all these kinds of things in places like the Gulf Islands. I can understand that temptation. My parents live in the Gulf Islands. I could very easily get in the ferry with my family, pack up for a couple days, literally talk to nobody, gassed up, supplied up, and have green grass for my kid to run around and play in and not see another human being for a few days and know that I wouldn't be endangering anyone. You can't do that, because even though I know it's safe, there are a lot of others that will start thinking, well, I deserve to do that too.
Yeah.
And they'd have a point. Mm-hmm. So if there was ever a time for the Prime Minister to just, and it was the damning thing. It wasn't even something he said, this is a choice I've made for the reasons X, Y, and Z. It was social media posts.
Yeah. Oh, the stupidity of that. Like, I don't know about you, Maclean, but like, I am hypersensitive right now to what I post photo wise. We go for a walk a couple times a day, but you got to be careful. You want, you make sure that, the angles aren't wrong. So it looks like you're closer to someone than they are and all these different things. This guy's posting pictures of their Easter egg hunt after on Friday saying, don't do outdoor Easter egg hunts. Now, I know the Easter Bunny was an essential service, but this was not an excellent idea. That's my John Horgan impression. Curate your photos, dude. Like, great family photo album, talk about it later, but you should be posting it online when you've specifically come out and told people not to do that. That's the crazy thing.
You can't have an Easter egg hunt in your vastly appointed living room? Come on.
Yeah. Or just skip the photos. Who cares, man? I don't need to see the Trudeau family wandering around doing stuff.
He's been prime minister, what, 5 years now? Like, this is a rookie mistake, quite frankly, that it's an unforced error.
Yeah. Well, it harkens back to politically he's tone deaf to certain things. The dancing in India, the Aga Khan trip, blackface. Like, there's certain things that he does not register that this is like unacceptable. And I don't know if it's his upbringing. I don't know if it's like just because that's the way his life has always been, but he can't seem to get out of that. Like, he gets to the edge of the bubble and you think, oh, he's going to emerge from it. And then no, he's back into it. So it's just it was a weird choice by him. And
is it the end of the world? No, it's just disappointing. Yeah,
exactly. Okay, shifting gears. I have a controversial thing to say. What if the cruise ship industry has actually charted the path out of this whole thing and into recovery for the rest of society?
Interesting. Go.
Allow me to express. So last year we went on our first cruise, and as a family, it was a great trip. We had a wonderful time. But leading up to it, we were very conscious of the fact that norovirus has sometimes attacked these ships, and you're on top. No doubt you're on top of each other. You're a floating hotel, your little floating city. You're touching the same things. Like, how does that all work? What I was astounded by was how seriously, in our case, Royal Caribbean took Norwalk virus. There were hand sanitizing stations everywhere. There were people waiting as you would walk into the buffets and the different restaurants. There was people there with sanitation, with a hand sanitizer, who would basically force you to hand sanitize before you went and sat down. And they were fun about it, washy, and they kind of give you the thing. You'd be like, all right. And, they had every morning on their little cruise ship TV, they have kind of a running loop of like a 20-minute show by the cruise director of what's coming up. But they had like the 90-second funny animated ad of washing your hands, use your hand sanitizer, let's all stay safe and healthy. Like, they really took it super seriously. And as we come out of this, I do wonder if that will end up being a model for how cities, how workplaces, how public spaces are going to have to act. Like, it's not enough for Metrotown to put hand sanitizing stations at every entrance. They need to have dozens of them in the food court areas. They're going to have to space out those tables. They're going to have to maybe have some staff member there with the little bottle, washy and kind of, doing that sort of thing. Like, I wonder if there are lessons to learn from the cruise ship industry, which has been, very much maligned over the past 3 months over, basically bad luck of timing. I mean, it's not their fault coronavirus popped up, but that is one part. The other part is they're floating, like, these are floating cities, and while we never saw them. Okay, my 16-year-old and I were a little bit geeky, so we went to the Q&A with the ship's captain. And, you get there, and so you can ask questions. And one of the questions someone asked was about, like, hospital facilities, like, what happens if someone gets sick? And they had a fully equipped, beds for 5 or 6 people, little hospital downstairs with a ship's doctor and a ship's nurse. And they're on call 24/7. And, he talked about how they had PPE and how they had, masks and stuff like that. So, if things happened, they could quickly help take care of it. And that, again, is, I think, a model for future things. Bob Mackin had an interesting FOI find where BC was so desperate for PPE that they were going through bureaucrats' desks, pulling masks, N95 masks, N95 masks out of people's earthquake preparedness kits. So I guess, don't be in the legislature right now. I guess when a lot of these earthquake preparedness kits that government put together for their workers in various facilities had these little masks. And so they actually dispatched people to like go bureaucrat by bureaucrat, desks that are abandoned because everyone's working from home, and pulling these masks out.
Oh my God.
That's how desperate they were. That should never happen again. Like, we're going to need stockpiles of this stuff, like real stockpiles. It's going to be expensive. We're going to need our own manufacturing lanes, not rely on other countries. All of that needs to happen. But again, it comes back to that kind of cruise ship model. Like, okay, we got to be prepared for everything. So there you go. There's my plug for the cruise ship industry. Maybe, just maybe, they can lead us out of this or show us the way.
You know, you make a good point. I'm imagining, we've talked about it, I think, last week, about the first time you choose to go to a, Canucks or Lions or whatever game, and what's that going to look like? How full will it be? How confident will you be? And I think you'll have to see something like that. You'll have to see people out front, and instead of patting you down for forbidden alcohol, maybe they should be washing you down instead with alcohol. Yeah. And it's
well, and I think they will, and I think they'll check your temperature too.
Yeah. Which is. I think checking your temperature will be to the world what getting patted down and taking your shoes off was to the world after 9/11. Just a thing that would have been so incomprehensible beforehand that you would never have submitted to. Yeah. Is now just going to be, thank goodness you're doing this.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's part of it, right? It's like employers, public spaces, governments, they're going to have to make people feel safe. Yeah. And to do that, you have to have these visible precautions. And, Langford's buying 15 of those remote temperature gauges. So basically I could point it at your head and, see what your temperature is. Okay. Like that, I think will become more and more normal and acceptable and even welcome, which is kind of crazy to think about. And, I think this is little stagger shifts and, a lot of that stuff will be done. Maybe you'll still work 2 days from home and 3 days in the office in order to keep distancing and stuff like that. But hygiene will be the number one thing that people will want to emphasize.
And I think there are there are some very smart people in the United States right now, probably working day and night trying to figure out what an election looks like under these circumstances. I mean, set aside political views of both the candidates now for a moment and just talk about the teams and what like physically campaigning looks like. The travel, the rallies, the door knocking, all the nuts and bolts stuff of, we literally call it shaking hands and kissing babies. Yeah. What does the first post-pandemic campaign look like?
Kissing hands, shaking babies, sniffing hair, the Biden model. You're right. I'm on a couple of American lists, and right now it looks like the pivot is to peer-to-peer text messaging. So essentially, Maclean, you're an ambassador for XYZ candidate, and so your job is to text your friends, and then we collate that data and do it that way. But man, that is a lot harder, and that is not. That feels weird. There's something weird about sliding someone's DMs with a, hey, you should vote for this guy.
Yeah, it'll. Some people will react badly, and I have doubts as to how reliable it's going to be in terms of things like get out the vote. But again, someone is going to figure out what this looks like, and they're going to be very successful. Because, I mean, people aren't thinking that this is going to be over and done with in the fall. There's going to be successive waves, hopefully smaller and smaller and smaller. But, we have an election next year too. And so at the very least, the next provincial election will physically look different than the last one.
Yeah, no, that's true. Now, if you're Republican, I don't understand Trump's reluctance to allow mail-in ballots. I mean, older voters vote Republican. Like, you should be, and homeowners are more likely to vote Republican. Like, to me, he should be like leading charge. Like, yes, let's only do mail-in ballots. Let's not do anything else. Like, that to me is the smarter. And the way he has a scandal a day. Like, the earlier you get your vote in the bank, if you're him, the better, right? Like,
that's true.
So I don't understand that, but that's kind of crazy. One more thing, as I've been thinking about where we go from here, I do think that our economy in BC, especially in the Lower Mainland, we're going to have to diversify away from tourism. Tourism needs to become like the icing on the cake in an economy. It can't be the cake anymore. And I do wonder what that means for communities like Tofino, Ucluelet, Penticton, holiday towns, Whistler, like what does it mean for them? But it's just, it's gonna be a long time before people travel again, especially from overseas. And you wonder, like, how do we? It's funny because we've always touted tourism as a great, part of the green economy. You're not taking stuff out of the ground and all this, but at the same time now, it shows just how precarious that actually is. You look at some of these Asian countries who, and their travel tourism is down 98, 99%. Like border crossings in Canada are down, 99% or something. Like it's going to be a long time before that has any semblance of normality, which means we've got to start thinking about how do we pivot away from tourism as being a major driver.
It's kind of remarkable in that they're having a very similar conversation for very different reasons in Alberta about relying too much on one industry. And so I think BC hopefully can figure out that, yes, not that BC relies on that industry to the same extent, but still, you're right. It is vulnerable to things like this. I live in a tourist town. We don't think of Victoria as being one, but believe me, it is in terms of the number of people who work in those industries. There's a reason that Canadians don't travel within the same country. And I've seen suggestions that, well, it's okay, we'll rely on domestic tourism. Have you seen how expensive flights are? There's a reason Canadians go to Disneyland, Acapulco, Disney World in the East, because it's cheaper. Yeah. Even given the exchange rate. I mean, I wouldn't want to look into the math of how expensive it would be to fly to, I don't know, I've never been to PEI. I'd like to see PEI, but for the same amount of money, I can go to LA twice.
Yeah, maybe 3 times. Yeah, PEI, you're talking about like $800, $900 airfare, and you can get to LA for 300-ish.
Yeah, so it's there's going to have to be a bit of a reckoning because, I think tourism is going to grind to a halt.
Yeah, I agree. I was surprised when Horgan said he thinks film will bounce back quickly. I don't think so. First of all, I don't know how many Americans are going to feel comfortable coming across the border, even though we've handled it much better than they have. I don't know how you get around, like, you're really going to label an actor an essential service, like the punk kids from Riverdale, like, oh, you're now an essential service, welcome to Canada. Like, what? Like, and it's an industry that is so pushed by the subsidy that provincial governments have to give. How is the provincial government going to afford to give subsidies to industries like that?
Yeah.
When you're going to have millions of people out of work, like how do you justify giving it to the film industry?
Well, the film industry, the economic impact it has is the same as, things like festivals, where it's like the money they spend doing all the other things. But the only way that they're going to be able to bring film back in the short term is by doing it like a work camp, where it's sort of out in the middle of nowhere and they set up a studio and they film, which is great, but then there's no economic impact. Right. There's no benefit. And you're right, the rest of it is all just subsidies. And so why would we rush to bring film back? Other than the fact that eventually all of us are going to burn through our respective Netflix and Disney Plus catalogs.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's a very important thing. So we've restarted the kids. My youngest is young enough that he doesn't remember or he never saw the first 20 or so Marvel movies.
Oh,
so
wow.
We've started a rewatch here at our house to make sure the boy is educated properly in the ways of Iron Man.
Excellent. We tried introducing Ian to Pirates of the Caribbean. A little too scary for him. Not quite there yet.
I only saw the first one, and then I was like, I'm good.
Well, he talks about he likes pirates and sea battles and all that. We thought it was perfect. I mean, well, if you like all this stuff, Ian, you'll love this movie. But there's also like, skeletons and,
Yeah, exactly. All right, well, that's all I've got, except for one more thing. Washington, Oregon, California have signed a deal now. They're looking at how to recover together, which is interesting. BC may want to get in on that, although I do wonder if there's just too much political sensitivity to extending a hand across the border. But I'll be curious if he tries to wiener his way in there.
Well, and just because of the nature of the pandemic down south, I think doing it together with Washington and Oregon would necessarily be slower than BC doing it alone. I mean, ordinarily I would completely agree, but I think in this case it actually would make more sense for a standalone.
Yeah, I mean, you're talking about 50 million people in those three states. Like that's a big boost if you could somehow have a free trade zone or something like that.
The world will look so different in so many ways 10 years from now, that the things that we can only guess at. But that is
how will we get our hipster culture if we don't have a deal with Portland? This is important.
That's true.
I'm gravely concerned. All right, that's all I got.
For me as well.
Look at us. We filled another 35 minutes-ish.
That's right. You're welcome, BC. This is content. It's one less thing on your Netflix list that you didn't burn through today.
By the way, a recommendation. We started Peaky Blinders. Have you watched Peaky Blinders?
I have not.
It's good. It's good. It's you gotta watch it with the captions on because some of them have very thick accents. But it's been good so far. We're 4 episodes in, and it's dark but not too dark. The anti-heroes still have enough redeeming qualities that you actually want to cheer for them. So yeah, there you go. Peaky Blinders on Netflix. There you go.
Excellent. Well, there you go. That's not my afternoon. Maybe my evening.
Don't watch it with a kid, though. Don't watch it with a kid.
No, I don't think so. All right. Well, thanks again for joining us. I am Maclean K. This is Jordan Bateman. Find us online at The Orca and Twitter at The Orca BC. Till next week.